There's a difference between being dangerous and being in charge. Plenty of animals are dangerous. A wasp is dangerous. A sea urchin is dangerous. But dangerous doesn't mean you run anything. Running something means the entire ecosystem adjusts its behavior around your existence. It means other animals change their migration routes, their feeding schedules, their social structures, all because you decided to show up. It means you don't just eat at the table. You own the restaurant, you hired the staff, and you're the reason the health inspector doesn't come around anymore. These are the 10 animals that don't just survive their ecosystems. They manage them. Some do it through raw power. Some do it through intelligence so uncomfortable it borders on a threat. Some do it through a reputation so thoroughly earned that just the rumor of their presence is enough to restructure the neighborhood. But all of them have one thing in common. Every other animal in their zip code has had to factor them into their daily life expectancy. This is the top 10 animals running their ecosystems like a crime boss. Starting at number 10 with an animal that controls its territory so completely that it essentially taxes every other predator in the area for the audacity of existing near it. The wolverine is 17 pounds of pure grievance with legs, and it has claimed more territory per body weight than almost any other land predator on Earth. A single wolverine will patrol a range of up to 500 square miles, which for context is roughly the size of Los Angeles, and it does this alone, on purpose, because it has decided that it doesn't need help and also that it hates everyone. But the wolverine isn't just running laps. It's maintaining a criminal enterprise. Wolverines are kleptoparasites by inclination, meaning they will find whatever a wolf pack, a bear, or a mountain lion just killed and take it. Not sneak it. Take it. With full eye contact. The wolverine will walk up to a fresh wolf kill, eat what it wants, cache the rest in a snowbank it uses as a personal freezer, and dare the wolves to say something about it. Wolves that outweigh it by a factor of 5 will frequently decide that today is not the day. What makes the wolverine a crime boss rather than just a criminal is the scent glands. Wolverines will mark cached food with a musk so potent that almost nothing will touch it afterward. It doesn't just steal food. It launders it, locks it away in a location only it can access, and renders the whole operation unusable to competitors. It runs the coldest storage operation in the boreal forest, and it's been doing this since before your country existed. Number 9 is an animal that never gets the credit it deserves because it does its best work quietly, which is exactly how you'd want it if you were running something. The African wild dog has the highest hunt success rate of any large predator on Earth. Not the lion, not the leopard, not the cheetah, who cheats by being fast and still manages to fail 60% of the time. The African wild dog closes somewhere between 70 and 85% of its hunts, and it does it through a level of coordination that should require a group chat. Wild dogs vote on whether to hunt. Literally, the pack sneezes to register a preference, and hunts only proceed when enough members have signed off. That's a quorum. That's parliamentary procedure in the middle of the Serengeti. And once they decide to move, the operation is fully distributed. Scouts relay information back to the pack. Roles shift mid-chase. If the lead dog tires, another rotates in without breaking stride. There's no wasted movement, no freelancing, no one going rogue. The prey doesn't get away because there is always another dog and another dog and another dog. They run the most disciplined crew in the savannah, and they use that discipline to carve out a territory that lions and hyenas constantly try to muscle in on. And while individual dogs don't win those confrontations, the pack's response to losing a kill isn't grief. It's accounting. They adjust the route, pick a different block, and hit the next target before the lions have finished eating what they took. You can't extort a crew that doesn't need to go back to the same corner twice. Number 8 is the reason entire river systems get restructured without a single animal lifting a paw. The beaver is not a predator, and it is absolutely running its ecosystem with a level of infrastructural ambition that makes most governments look underfunded. Beavers build dams that flood forests, create wetlands, raise water tables, and manufacture habitat for dozens of species that had no input in the decision and no ability to stop it. The beaver doesn't ask permission. It just starts building, and the landscape adjusts. What makes this crime boss behavior is the leverage. Once a beaver dam is established, the wetland it creates becomes one of the most biodiverse environments in its region. Fish populations increase. Waterfowl move in. Amphibians thrive. Plants that depend on standing water take root. And every single one of those species now depends on infrastructure the beaver controls. The beaver has made itself indispensable to an entire community of organisms by making sure they all need the thing only it can provide. Remove the beaver and the whole system collapses. Streams erode. Water tables drop. The wetland dries out, and the species that built their lives around it disappear. The beaver isn't just running the ecosystem. It's the ecosystem's landlord, and it owns every unit. Number 7 doesn't intimidate through size or speed or bite force. It intimidates through omniscience. The crow knows your face. It knows your schedule. It knows which humans feed it and which ones tried to shoo it away 3 Tuesdays ago, and it has neither forgiven nor forgotten. Crows operate with a long memory and a longer reach, and in the urban environments where they've decided to set up shop, they have essentially gone to war with the human population and are currently winning. In Tokyo, crows figured out that cars run over nuts and crack them open. So they started placing nuts in traffic intersections, waiting for the light to stop traffic, and then walking into the road to collect the cracked shells. They learned to use crosswalks so they didn't get hit. They adapted their behavior to incorporate traffic signals into their food acquisition strategy. That is using human infrastructure as a tool. That is the behavior of something that has looked at civilization and decided it's useful. But crows don't just manage humans. They manage entire bird communities through a combination of intelligence and deliberate aggression. They'll mob owls, hawks, and eagles far larger than themselves, coordinating to drive apex predators out of their territory through sheer organized harassment. They cache food across hundreds of locations and remember almost all of them. They hold what researchers describe as funeral gatherings when one of their own dies, using the event to gather information about what killed it so the group can avoid the same threat. That's not instinct. That's institutional knowledge. That's an organization that learns from its losses and adjusts its operations accordingly. Number 6 runs the ocean's continental shelf with the calm authority of someone who has never once been threatened and knows it. The great white shark is one of the most effective apex predators ever produced by evolution. But what puts it in this conversation isn't the bite or the speed. It's the effect. Great whites trigger what's called the landscape of fear, which is the scientific term for what happens when prey animals so thoroughly believe they're going to get eaten in a specific location that they avoid it entirely, even when no predator is present. Research off the coast of California found that when great whites moved through an area, sea otters, seals, and other prey species didn't just flee. They abandoned entire feeding zones for weeks, sometimes months. Kelp forests that depended on sea urchin populations being kept in check by otters started to collapse because the otters had relocated their entire operation away from the shark's known patrol routes. One predator restructured the feeding behavior of multiple species so thoroughly that plant life was affected. That's macroeconomic disruption from a single animal's commute. And then there's the orca problem, which is that great whites, despite being the apex predator of most oceans, have a documented physiological fear response to orcas. Great whites that encounter orca pods have been tracked abandoning feeding grounds for up to a year. The fact that one of the most dangerous animals on the planet has its own predator hierarchy above it and responds to it by vacating the entire district tells you everything about how power actually works in an ocean. Everyone answers to someone. Even the crime boss has a boss. Number 5 is that boss. And it's not subtle about it. The orca is the most dominant apex predator on Earth with the possible exception of humans, and unlike humans, it has not spent any part of its existence wondering if it's allowed to be. Orcas hunt in pods with the coordination of a military operation, communicate in dialects specific to their family group, teach hunting techniques to younger generations, and have been documented creating entirely new strategies in real time when an old one stops working. They figured out how to beach themselves temporarily to grab seals off the shore. They've learned to use wave wash to knock prey off ice floes. They've been watched working in teams to create synchronized waves that destabilize floating ice. One orca pod in New Zealand learned to tail slap stingrays into unconsciousness, a technique that was observed spreading to other pods through what researchers carefully described as social learning and what everyone else would describe as sharing the play. Orcas aren't just intelligent. They have culture. And their culture is built entirely around being better at killing than whatever they were killing yesterday. Every apex predator in the ocean modifies its behavior around the presence of orcas. Great whites relocate. Whale sharks avoid orca territories. Even sperm whales, which outweigh orcas significantly, have documented defensive formations when orcas approach. The orca doesn't patrol a territory because it doesn't need to. The whole ocean is the territory. It just decides where it wants to be, and everything else figures out the implications. Number 4 is terrestrial, technically, but it spends enough time in the water to have made both ecosystems its personal administrative district. The Nile crocodile has been running the same operation for over 200 million years with essentially no changes to the business model because the business model works. It controls access to water in one of the most resource-scarce environments on Earth. Every animal that needs to drink, cross, or feed near a riverbank in sub-Saharan Africa has to factor in the possibility that the log it's approaching is not a log. That single reality shapes the movement patterns, drinking schedules, and migration routes of hundreds of species. But the crocodile isn't just ambushing. It's organizing. Nile crocs have been documented engaging in cooperative hunting where multiple individuals work together to herd fish into shallows, take turns cutting through a bait ball, and rotate roles between active hunters and resting individuals with a regularity that implies coordination. There are recorded cases of multiple crocodiles sharing a carcass in an arrangement that appeared deliberate rather than competitive, with larger individuals deferring to smaller ones at certain stages of consumption. For an animal that supposedly operates on pure instinct, it's running a remarkably structured kitchen. What makes the crocodile a crime boss rather than just a very old killer is the patience. Crocodiles have been documented memorizing the daily patterns of prey, waiting weeks or months for the right moment to strike, and returning to the same ambush point repeatedly based on predictable animal behavior. That's not hunting. That's surveillance. That's an operation with a filing system. Number 3 controls its ecosystem not through violence, but through an act of agricultural intervention so consequential that the entire history of the African savanna is partially a story about what happens when this animal is present versus when it isn't. The elephant doesn't just live in its ecosystem. It engineers it. African elephants uproot trees to create grassland. They dig water holes that dozens of other species depend on during dry season. They create pathways through dense vegetation that become migration routes used by animals for generations. They disperse seeds across distances no other land animal can match, functioning as the primary reforestation system for some of the most biodiverse forests on the continent. When elephants are removed from an ecosystem through poaching or habitat fragmentation, the changes are measurable and cascading. Vegetation becomes denser. Grassland shrinks. Species that depend on open terrain lose territory. Waterholes dry up. The entire community of organisms that built their survival around the elephant's activity has to reorganize, and many of them can't. Ecologists call elephants a keystone species, but what they mean is that the elephant is load-bearing. Take it out, and structural integrity fails. And then there's the other side, which is that the elephant is also a 13,000-pound animal with a documented capacity for revenge, grief, and long-term memory that it applies to threats with the same precision it applies to navigation. An elephant that has been harmed by a specific human, vehicle, or group will recognize and respond to that threat years later. The elephant engineers your habitat and also remembers if you did something about it. That's a landlord with institutional memory and a felony charge waiting to happen. Number 2 runs the world's most important ecosystem from a position that most people would consider impossible because it's invisible, it's microscopic, and it produces the majority of the oxygen you're currently using to read this. Phytoplankton are single-celled photosynthetic organisms that drift at the ocean's surface and are responsible for approximately 50 to 80% of all oxygen production on Earth. They form the base of virtually every marine food web. They drive the carbon cycle. They regulate global temperature. Every fish, every whale, every seabird, every coastal ecosystem on the planet runs on what phytoplankton produce. When phytoplankton populations shift, the effects are felt at every level. A decline in one region causes fish populations to collapse, which causes seabird nesting to fail, which affects coastal nutrient cycles, which eventually loops back to affect the land. A bloom in another region can cause hypoxic dead zones that suffocate everything that can't relocate fast enough. Phytoplankton don't control their ecosystem through behavior or intelligence or coordinated strategy. They control it by being structurally necessary. Nothing else functions if they don't function. That's not power. That's being the infrastructure itself. They're the silent partner in every transaction the ocean makes, and they take no credit for any of it, which, frankly, is the most crime boss move on this entire list. And at number 1, the animal that doesn't just run its ecosystem, but has run it for so long and so thoroughly that the ecosystem has physically changed shape around it. The wolf. Specifically, what wolves do when you put them back into a system they've been absent from long enough for that system to forget what it was like to be managed. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 1995 after a 70-year absence, the effects were so comprehensive and so structurally deep that ecologists coined a term for it. Trophic cascade. What happened was this. The wolves began hunting elk. Not just killing elk, but changing where elk went. Elk that were previously grazing freely along riverbanks moved away from those areas because the open terrain made them vulnerable. Vegetation that had been grazed to nothing for decades started growing back. Willows, aspens, cottonwoods returned to riverbanks. Songbird populations that depended on those trees returned. Beaver populations that needed those trees for dam building returned, and with them, the wetlands, the fish populations, the amphibians, and the water tables. The rivers themselves changed course as the newly stabilized banks resisted erosion differently. The physical geography of Yellowstone was altered by the reintroduction of one predator. The wolves didn't do any of this directly. They didn't plant trees. They didn't reroute rivers. They didn't construct wetlands. They just made the elk afraid of specific places, and the entire ecosystem responded to that fear by reorganizing itself around the new reality. That is governance. That is the landscape restructuring itself in response to one animal's presence because every other organism in the system has to account for it. A crime boss doesn't personally carry out every operation. They don't need to. Their presence alone determines how everyone else moves. The wolf didn't need to touch the riverbank to change it. It just needed the elk to know it was out there. And 70 years of absence was all it took for the whole system to fall apart. Which tells you everything about who was really running things the whole time. Drink water, hug your mother, and stay out of Yellowstone after dark. See you in the next one.